Well, hello, everybody. Welcome. And I want to thank the Illinois Holocaust Museum for inviting me to speak today. My name is Julie Meetal Berman, and I live in the Dallas, Texas area. And I'm going to tell you a story, a love story of sorts. So both of my parents were Holocaust survivors. And since I'm their daughter, that makes me the second generation of survivors. So this story is all about my parents and not about me at all. So these are my parents, Magda and Les Mittelman. Cute little couple, don't you think? I think they're cute. And the picture in the middle is of them on their wedding day in 1945. Both of my parents came from Hungary. My mom came from a small town called Szolnok, and my father came from a larger city, probably the second largest city in Hungary, called Deportation. So life before the Holocaust was pretty much like our lives today. My grandparents on the left, they both worked. My grandmother was a seamstress, so she made clothes and dresses for people. And my grandfather was a salesman, and he traveled quite a bit. The picture in the middle is of my mom and her older sister. My mom was about 3 years old there. And the picture on the right is of the family at a wedding, probably one of the last pictures that was taken as a family. They were all at a wedding. So before the Holocaust, my grandparents and my mom, they weren't very religious. They would go to synagogue on high holidays. And my mom went to public school. This is her class picture from 1938-39. She was 16 years old there. My father's side of the family was a little bit more middle class. My grandfather had his own business. He made furniture. And many times after school, my father would go and work with him and learn the trade. My grandmother was a stay-at-home mom. And this is a picture of my father when he was about 16, 17 years old. So they were a little bit more religious than my mom's side of the family. My father went to religious school, and he's the one in the red circle, scrawny little kid. And he also sang in the synagogue choir, but many times he would skip rehearsal because he loved to play soccer, so he didn't show up. So in 1939, Germany invaded Poland and the war began. Hungary did not actually join right away, but it was a very anti-Semitic country. And so they were on the Nazi side. They sympathized with the Nazis, and so first order that they gave was that all men over the age of 18 had to enlist into the military. And then pretty soon afterwards, all the men who were Jewish had to start wearing a yellow armband so that they can tell who's who. And soon they took all the Jewish men and formed them into work battalion. And they took these battalions all over Hungary in preparation to the eventual time when the Nazis would come into Hungary. And so they were taken to do hard labor, slave labor, and build barracks, build camps, and start getting ready for the Nazis. So these battalions were taken all over, and the treatment was pretty brutal. They had no contact with their families. Their families did not know if they were alive or dead. And so, and the Hungarian military was really brutal. The treatment these men received was sometimes worse than the Nazis. So one of the places that my father was taken to was a little town called Szolnok. And that's where our love story begins. So now you're going to get to meet my father, and he's going to tell you about his time in Solnok.
Well, they sometime, where we were housing, there was elementary school, and she had a friend maybe 2 blocks further, and they knew in the city a lot of Jewish boys there. So the Jewish girl, they came to visiting there. They saying, we need something, we can bring you, etc. There I met with her. And I was there about 10 months in Solnok. And that's the place which is the most comfortable, because I get a very good friend, one of the Hungarian sergeant, who knows I met with the girl and I want to go to visiting her. And sometimes he take me out from the camp to take with the girl, let me go there, and he picked me up later to go take back to the camp.
So even though, like I said, Hungary was a very anti-Semitic country, the rules that were put out by the government during this time was getting harsher and harsher for the Jews to abide by. So now you're going to meet my mom, and she's going to talk about how she had to start wearing the yellow star.
They didn't the yellow stars. We had to wear the yellow stars, and we can go out on the street. My mother, everybody had to move themselves. My mother did it, and I was sitting down on my coat, on my dress also, because I did a job, and I went to work with my, with the yellow star.
So after 10 months in Solnok, my father and his unit was shipped out to the Russian front. The Russian front was the border between Poland, the Ukraine, and the Russians, basically the Soviets who occupied that area. And so in the next video, my father is going to tell you what he had to do once he got there. Now, this was the first time that he actually came in contact with the Nazis.
And there we get a German. And those Germans, they were taking us to next to their barrack, and they used us for putting down mines. They signed up an area where we had to put mines there. They show us how to put, or cleaning mines. The first day experience what we had, the 2 boys blew up on that minefield when they put them up. They didn't do that right, they were careless and stepped on the mine what they not ever put it down, because they didn't mind them.
So here I'm very lucky to actually have a couple of pictures of my father with his unit. And you can see they're all wearing Hungarian army uniforms, and you can see the yellow armband on there. So as they're going all along the border, laying down landmines, one of the supply wagons broke down. And because my father worked with his father and learned how to build things, he became very valuable for the Nazis. So the Nazi in charge told my father that I'm going to send you to the next little village to have you repair the wagon wheel. And he sent him off to this little village. And when my father walked into this blacksmith's place, the old man who owned it looked at my father and just began to cry, just bawling. And my father said, "Why are you crying?" And the man said, "Because you look so much like my son, and I haven't seen my son in 3 years. The Russian army came in here and they took him away, and I don't know if he's alive or dead." He said, "Come inside and sit down. I'll bring you some food and I'll do the repair for you." So my father was, very happy. He hadn't had a good meal in a long time. And he sat down and had some food. And the old man repaired the wagon. And before he was ready to ship my father back, he told him, "Come here." I want to show you something. And he took him to the front door and he said, look there in the middle of the town. He said, do you see that hill over there? He said, that hill consists of 9,000 Jews. 9,000 Jews from this town and the surrounding areas were rounded up with the help of the locals, and they were forced to dig a ditch, and they were all shot and killed there, men, women, and children. He said that hill did not stop moving for 3-4 days. He said that hill will always be here as a reminder of what these town people did. So by now it was already 1944, and now Hungary joined the war. First order that came from the government was that all the Jews had to report to the ghetto. So the ghetto could have been a building, it could have been a city block, it could have been a neighborhood, depending on how many Jews lived in that town. And since Szolnok was such a small little town, the ghetto was the school building. And here in these pictures, you can see how on the left, they're boarding it up, they're closing up the entrance. Once you're in the ghetto, you can't get out, you can't go to work, you can't go to school, you can't bring food for your family. And here on the right, you can see how people are moving some of their belongings in. And so in the next video, my mom's going to talk about the deportation. But first, I'm sorry, about the ghetto. But first, she's going to talk about a chance meeting she had with a German who tried to warn her and help her, and why she stayed.
First, that he was in Romania and he saw how the Germans, they people, they picking up children on people on the street, from the street, throwing up on a truck, and they just taking it. And he told they will happen here too. Don't stay here. Go away from here. Where to go? Now where to go? And he told me that he's giving me address in Berlin. And he told, go to Berlin. And I give you address where to go. And I told him, I'm not going. I'm not leaving my parents. I am going where my parents will go. And then one nice day there came 2 policemen, and I told, you have to pick up all your things, not too many things, because you are going to the ghetto. So we picked up some bed things, a pillow and a comforter, and couple of things, dish, and a little buggy, and we just pull it in the ghetto.
And a few weeks later, an order came again, which said, you're going to be deported. You're going to be sent away. They didn't tell them where they're sending them, but that they're going to be taken away. And so here in the pictures, you can see on the left, as they're being marched through the middle of the town, heading towards the rail station. And you can see on the sides, what do you see there? Who do you see? People standing around, watching as this entire group of people is being taken away. These people are their neighbors, their schoolmates, the people they worked with, the people that they knew all of their lives. And what are they doing? They're just standing there. They're bystanders watching as this entire group is being taken away. And here on the right, you can see them at the train station. They look confused. They don't know what's going to happen, where they're going. So in the next video, my mom will talk about the deportation. And she calls the box cars wagons. Some people call them wagons, some people call them boxcars, other people call them cattle cars.
And nobody was telling us anything. And we were going with the second transport. The first transport went to Vienna. We didn't know that. The second transport went to Auschwitz. We didn't know where we were going. And we was in the train on this day and on the way to Auschwitz.
Were there other people on the train?
Oh, and the train was full. And the train was full with people. We hardly can sit down.
How old were you?
I was 20. Well, they were rushing up us to the second, to the wagons. They was even pushing us up on the wagon.
Who was pushing you?
The Germans. And we was about in this wagon. I mean, there was about 5, which one going, or maybe more. We was about 100 people in this wagon. And there was also an old man on the other side in a wheelchair. They was putting down with the wheelchair. And we started to go. We didn't know where we were going, but we just moved out. And we was about 3 days on the road, was going. Then we saw a chimney, 2 big chimneys in the distance, and they was burning. The flame was high up on the sky. And my mother told us that, well, I don't know where we're going, but you get ready that maybe we're going right in the flame. And I don't know why, but I just didn't feel anything. I saw the flame. I didn't feel anything. And then we went closer to the place. Then we smelled the flesh, the burning flesh. And finally, the train pulled in and stopped.
So even though Hungary joined the war late in 1944, they managed to deport over a matter of 2 months, 440,000 Jews to Auschwitz. Of those 440,000 Jews, 320 were murdered as soon as they got there. They were right away sent away into the gas chambers. So here she arrived in Auschwitz, and in the picture on the left, you can see how people have just come off the trains. You can see the entrance there in the distance and the smoke in the sky. And you can see people are rushing around trying to find family members. They're confused, they don't know what to do. And you can see the German soldiers out in the front. You can almost hear them barking orders at them. And on the right, you can see how they're a little bit more organized. Men on the one side, women on the other. Notice how many more women there are than men. Remember, I told you in the beginning, all the men had been enlisted into the military. So the only ones who were left were either too old or too young to serve. So now in the next video, my mom is going to talk about the arrival.
I was waiting until they coming down. And then I looked in and I saw the door open in the other side. And there was the flame. And the soldier who was opened the door, they pushed down the wheelchair with the old man. And then I was running after my mother and we saw that it was dark, it was evening, it was raining. And my mother took some flowers from the head. And started to going when I looked back on the man. Just spirit was standing there in the court like my father outside. But even when we went, it was lunch because all the reflectors were on. I saw when we passed it, there was a hill of baby shoes. And right beside it, there was an older hill with eyeglasses. And I thought to my mother, where we are going? And from this fence, there was a fence, and the woman was standing there and hollering that give the babies to the mother, give the babies to your grandmother or your mother. But they just keep, hollering to us. And we felt this part and we went to a bathroom. And then we went through all this cleaning of the hair on the body, on the whole body. Then there was some larger behind us at the same place. But when we started to go, I was looking back. He was still standing there on the first lane in the men's section. And I saw my father. He was looking so sad and so poor with his long winter coat on him. And I just wanted so much to go back to tell him goodbye. But there was a machine there. And we went in this bathhouse and they cleaned us up. And then after the cutting of the hair, we went to a shower. And when we came out from the shower, they gave us some rags to wear, which one of them was this short, the other was this one. So we were trying to change it. So when we came out in a big room, there was the men already, but very few men was came back from the shower. There wasn't more than a dozen.
So there was not more than a dozen men who came back from the shower. And again, because they were either too old or too young to be of any use as labor in the camps. So one of the things I forgot to mention is that as she talked about the train ride to Auschwitz, and it lasted 3 days, the 3 days meant it was moving for 3 days. There were no stops. There was no food, there was no water, there was hardly any room to stand or sit down. They were jam-packed in there. And there was no bathrooms, nothing. So now she was in Auschwitz. And as you can see, it was very crowded in the bunkers. Sometimes 3-4 people in a bunk. It was on wood. Sometimes they had to lay on the concrete floor. There was nothing there to make their lives more comfortable. There were no pillows, there were no mattresses, there was no blankets. So as you can see, it was rough and they had to do what they could to survive. And on the picture on the right, you see a group of women. They look fairly young, their heads have been shaven, and they are wearing some kind of a uniform. So these women probably just came from a selection. So in the next video, my mom's going to talk about the selections, and she's going to mention Dr. Mengele. I'm sure most of you have heard of the name. He was known as the Angel of Death because he selected people to either be sent to the gas chamber, to work, or to his infirmaries where he did some unspeakable things. So now my mom will talk about the selections.
The selection, we went out on there was a big plot, big place before, right in the entrance, and they was taking Ghettos and naked. And then I saw first time Mengele, Dr. Mengele, and he was selecting. He selected out my cousin first, and she went on. Then a couple of weeks later, they tried to do it to hurt us. On the holidays, there was always selection. On every selection, Mengele showed up. The second selection was about in Rosh Hashanah. And then they selected me. And we were sitting there on the plaza, that Platz they called, and waiting for to go. They take it to the or in the shower or right to the patient, but usually they give it some normal dress before they send it to a transport. So, but we were sitting there on the front of the entrance and was waiting there, and I was thinking about my mother, that I leave my mother and my sister and my youngest sister. I always felt she was always very, very keen on my mother, always worried about her, and I was worried too, and I didn't want her to leave them. And then I just jumped up and I started to run. And there was a German soldier who was a priest in civil, and a bunch of women around him and listening, his predication. And then I just crawled in the middle. And then saw the post who was after me. He lost me. So I went back to my mother and sister, and we was there until Yom Kippur, and there was an order selection, and they selected my sister. And then I was smarter because I tried to hide him, and they selected my sister, and my sister was dead. My sister was gone. Later, they was making a selection again. And every selection I was hiding. And I never was in my mind that they will select old people or not young people, because until this time they always was selecting the young people who they take at work here and there and everywhere. And this time I was hiding, and my mother was on the selection. When I came back, I find out that my mother is not there. I was running out on the street and I saw my mother is marching, marching there with a bunch of women. They all has a white hair. And I started to running after her and hollering her, but I don't know, he didn't hear me. And I was keep running on the blocker tester, who was responsible for everybody. She was running after me, and she was trying to find me. And she told, you have to come back, and don't worry about the people. Don't worry about my mother, where she went. Then she was telling me that she by herself was taking her mother to the gas chamber. And it wasn't feel me better, I tell you the truth.
So now my mom was all alone. And soon, not too long after, the Germans began worrying that the Russians are coming over the border, the Polish border, and that they were going to try and liberate Auschwitz. So they put a bunch of the inmates on 2 train loads, And if you've ever read the story of Anne Frank, then you know that she was on one of these two trains, and they sent them to Germany, to another camp called Bergen-Belsen. So my mom was on one of these two trains, and she was sent to Bergen-Belsen. When she got to Bergen-Belsen, she found that the conditions there was even worse than in Auschwitz. There was hardly any food, there was no sanitation. It was where people were dying left and right. But she also found her sister and her cousin, both of them alive. But soon after she got there, word came that the British were starting to come from the west. So the Russians are coming from the east, the British are coming from the west, and the Americans are coming from the south. And of course, the Germans decided that they're going to move them again deeper into Germany. So they couldn't put them on the trains anymore because the trains became targets for bombardment. So they started walking them. These walks were called the death marches, and they walked mostly at night through the mountains, through Bavaria, through the cold. They walked and marched on deeper into Germany. So now we're going to switch back to my father. Remember where we left him? He was somewhere along the border of Poland and Russia, or the Soviets, moving around, putting down landmines. So the Russians are actually are coming now across the border, and the German in charge of my father's unit started moving them back into Poland. And as they're going along, another wagon, supply wagon, breaks down, and the German in charge tells my father, pick a couple of guys and stay here, repair it, and you come follow us. He wanted to get out of the way because he knew the Russians are coming. And he left my father and two of his friends there on the side of the road. As soon as they were out of sight, my father looked at his friends and he said, I'm not an idiot, I'm not going after him. And the three of them took off into a nearby forest. And then when they got into the forest, they found a group of men who said that they were partisans and told them what we do. He said, we do everything we can to sabotage. We will blow up their bridges, we will blow up their tunnels, we will steal their supplies, we'll do everything in our power to keep them back and allow time for the Americans, the Russians, and the British to get here and liberate Poland. If you want to join us, you can join us. So my father joined. And what he found is that there were all kinds of people in this group. There were Russians, there were Jews, there were Polish people, Hungarian people, there were Jews, Catholics, Christians. Anybody who wanted to join, men and women, could join and fight back. Oh, my father fought back with them. And they went all over sabotaging. And so in the next video, you're going to see my father, and he's going to tell you what happened when he got to Warsaw.
The Warsaw was under German occupation. Germans, they were there. The ghetto was burned already. And they knew it. We have to go in because the Russians getting close to the river, and on the other side of Wisla. That was the name of the river, which is cut at Warsaw half. One side, that was the name of the river Wisla. One side was Warsaw city, on the other side some suburb, whatever. So they expected there the Russian. We was planning to stay there on opposite side, the German side, to anything what we can destroy there. We were 18 people there. And we were hiding daytime in the houses, and evening we went out. The second evening, I was together with one of my friends, and the big guy, and with another, with Smith. And we was playing with the machine gun. We was set up with the machine gun. And the German patrol who came around there, and that's what we were holding them up. And we had to move back because they were coming up, the Germans, with the tanks. So we moved back about 5 miles from there, about 5 miles, about an hour and a half walk back in the forest, so not to find us. And there they had some small place, building, some kind of storage, something. We put them there to sit there during the daytime. The Germans, they know they had groups there around that city, which is guerrilla groups, and they want to get rid of it. And the German airplane, Germans took us, they came up daytime looking at us. And they find that building because he turned back, and when we saw his turn back, we jumped out from the building and some ditches closed there. We lay down there. They started to hit bombing that building, and they shooting machine gun. So that building, what we had, I just started, we went there when we got there to sleeping there. I took off everything, just the pants in the shirt I had there. And there I had the watch in my pocket that I got from my girlfriend when I met with her in Solomon before we left. He gave me a silver watch, a flat one, but they were wearing in the small pocket. I left there, so the watch is burned there with my everything else. And we were lucky because we got away without any scratch with the German gun, and we went try to go back to the unit. So we got back to the basic unit, and the third day we went back to the Warsaw again, because every night a different group went there. So the third night was all to go there. So I went there, we were sitting on the top of the storage place, higher place, we were sitting there. And the Germans, they were patrolling, and they show us up there on the hill, on the top of the building, and they started shooting us. And we was replying there, and I was in the machine gun, and Sam, he was with me with the belt, which is the heavy that, you know, they call them, and the bullet to get into the gun. And a minute I was telling Sam, I don't get supply. I stuck. What are you doing? I looking at Sam. Sam had no head. They cut. With you know, they were shooting them with the machine guns, and I don't know. They were some kind of grenades, and probably that one of them cut his head. Just he had no hair right next to me. Oh my God, I said, I had full bloody. And behind the building was my friend who was preparing the bed with the bullet. I said to him, Reisner, let's go from here, because the gun is gone. We have no way where to stay here. And we tried to go, getting darker that day. We tried to go next to the building. We were laying down behind them. And we know we had a plan to 10 o'clock evening to get one spot where we're supposed to get together to moving back further. And evening at the evening, I said, no, right, we have to move. So we started to going slowly, and they were shoot up those candles, like with the air, they're shooting up candles, which is coming back down with the parachute, and they light up the whole area. So when they shoot up, they picked up us with the light, and they started shooting. The first cut, what they get in, I get hit. They hit me, my leg, a couple of places. My legs get hit from here down, and I couldn't stand up on it. And I am telling to my friend, Reisner, I can't stand on my legs. Would you have me to go try to get to the house? He said to me, you're crazy. How can I help you? Everyone is gonna die here. I can't help you. I can help myself. And he left me there. So I was staying there. You know, the biggest wound was my knee. And I had to tear my shirt and try to clean and tap my that what I could move. So I would stay there about get completely dark, and I tried to crawling from there. And again, you know, the candles went up in the air, and they saw me there, and like the second time. And they shoot me that time on my arm, my head, and on my back. So I was there. I couldn't move. I was bleeding there, and I left there unconscious. And I waked up next couple of hours later, probably. They were carrying me. They carrying me on the stretcher to Polak. They're taking me somewhere. At that time, I have to mention to you, I was wearing a Hungarian army uniform. What we was taking during the time when we were in the guerrillas, they were robbing one of the storage places when they had the armies there. So they don't know who I am. They know I had wearing a uniform, which is not Polish, not Russian. They know the Germans, that's a Hungarian uniform. So they are carrying me the first aid place. They took me a first aid place, and the two boys who they carried the stretcher, they know me because they were part of there, but they got caught with the Germans. They caught it. And one of them is telling me in my ear, don't worry, Magyar. That's the way the Polak called the Hungarian. Don't worry, Magyar, M-A-G-A, because we're not going to tell them who you are.
So my father was picked up and he was taken to a field hospital, a German one. And the doctor who operated on him realized that this guy is Jewish. And so the doctor quarantined my father away from the other German soldiers in that field hospital. The doctor saved his life not only by operating on him, but also by sequestering him away from everybody else. And he brought him food a couple of times a day and changed his bandages and helped my father. But soon, one day, the German doctor came and he said, tonight after dark, I want you to crawl out the window and get out of here because tomorrow morning we're being shipped back to Germany. The war is going to be over. We're being sent back to Germany. The Russians are taking over Warsaw. So my father on crutches crawled out the window that night and started to make his way back to Hungary. Remember, my mom was still on that death march. And so Germany is being bombarded all over. And my mom is going to tell you next how she was liberated.
Well, he was working in the factory until March. In March, they was coming the British, and we had to, move from there. I mean, they wanted to take that to Bergen, so we went on the road to work on the Bergen, but Bergen fell to the English, to the British, and they can't take that. So we was walking through Bavaria.
Walking?
Walking to the mountains. We was walking usually in the night, but sometimes we was walking on the day too. It was snowy and slippery and through to the mountains there. It was terrible. My sister was all the time with me. I was watching her carefully. I was taking care of her again. And when we arrived in Dresden station, when we arrived there was a air raid. On the Germans, they just shut, closed the doors, and they ran to the bunkers in Germany. And in the middle of Germany. And we was, praying in this wagon because this, we was up and down, jumping up and down the first day. And then we went on the road and we was going to a really wooded area, not, not wood, trees area. Both sides of the road is trees. And we was going on a friend of ours had an infection in the leg. And we was hiking her on the two sides and carrying her little bag. And when we passed a little bush house on the side, then I went inside and I just pushed them out behind the little building. And we were standing there all of the until this whole big transport is passed by. We went in this village, we just picked up a house and we went in and we had some food. And then this lady invited in and gave us some sandwich. And when we left, she gave us a bag cooked potato. And she came out to the door with us and she thought, this way coming the Russians, and this way they coming the Americans. And then I told my sister, okay, let's go to America. And we went on this way and we find 3 soldiers was coming on the bicycle.
So the war was over. And you can imagine the confusion. Everybody's trying to get home. So my mom had to make her way through Germany, through Austria, back to Hungary. It was pretty chaotic because there was no mass transportation. The trains had been bombed out. And so it took several weeks to make their way back. There were German soldiers, American soldiers, Russian soldiers. There were survivors, those who can still maneuver on their own. Everybody's trying to figure out how to get home. When she got home, she went back to Solnok to see who came back, to see what family came back. She didn't know who survived and who didn't. But when she got to Solnok, she decided to take a chance and see if my father came back. So she sent a telegram to Debrecen to say, I'm back, come and get me. At the same time, my father was making his way back through the Czech Republic, what is today the Czech Republic, and finally back to Debrecen. When he got back to Debrecen, the next day, his mother and his older sister with a 5-year-old son also came back, which was very unusual because usually the older people and the very young did not survive. But they did, and he got her telegram. So off he went to Solnok to find her. But my mom decided she was going to go to all the different locations in the area where she used to have family to see if anybody came back. So she left a note in Solnok that if Les comes, please tell him I went to this town. She went to the next town, and there she left another note. If Les comes, tell him I went to this town. And so she went from town to town where she used to have family to see who came back. But in each place, she would leave a note in case Les came back. And of course, he came to Solnok and found the note. And so he went to the next town and found another note. And they followed her this way until he finally caught up with her. And they were married the next day. You saw their picture there in the beginning. So they got married and they started to put their lives back together. But in 1949, Hungary became a communist country. And my father said, I'm done. I'm done with Hungary. We're leaving. So he and my mom and my older brother, by then they had a son, decided to leave the communist Hungary. So they actually had to escape. They couldn't just leave. They had to cross the border into Austria, make their way through Italy, and then finally from Italy, they went for Israel. When they got to Israel, 1949, Israel was a brand new country. First thing my father had to do was to join the military and help establish the new Jewish homeland. Soon after that, I was born in Israel, and we lived in Israel until 1964, when my family decided to move to the United States. And in 1986, my parents joined me and my family in Texas. And so here we are, a little collage of the family that came from that love story. And I want to leave you with a message from my father. So my father would always say, if you think something like the Holocaust could never happen again, you're wrong. And if you think that it could never happen in the United States, you're very wrong. And if you think it can only happen to the Jewish people, you're dead wrong. He said, it can happen before you know it. Before you blink an eye, it can happen. He said, always pay attention to what's going on around you. Pay attention to everything that you're being told. Don't take everything at face value. Do your research. Find out for yourself what's fact and what is fiction. He said, always be aware and always be proactive and be an upstander. If you see something that's not quite right, do something about it. Don't just stand to the side and let it happen, because today it's not affecting you. It will affect you at some point. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Julie. That was a wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
I've got a couple questions if you're up for it.
Sure.
The first one is, when did you first hear your family's story?
That's really a good question, because my parents never talked about it. I was already 40 years old when I first heard their story. I forced my parents to actually do an interview with the Shoah Foundation, with the foundation that Steven Spielberg found. And when they came to my area, I said, you have to do this. Not for me, do it for your grandchildren. And so they finally agreed. And even then, they didn't allow me into the room where they were interviewed. It wasn't until I received the copy of their interviews that I was able to sit down and actually watch and learn everything.
And what was that like, that experience of first hearing it like that?
It actually changed my life. Sometimes you don't know what you have until it's gone. So that actually just changed my life completely. And I decided their story had to be told. So at first I'm an artist, so I started by painting their stories. I thought I would do 3 paintings, one for my mom, one for my dad, and one kind of to show what came out of it. But it ended up being 11 paintings and 3 sculptures. And I took it everywhere. I still do take it everywhere. Everywhere I can to show and educate people.
That's amazing. How did you get involved with the museum in Dallas then?
Well, the day my father died, like I said, you don't realize what you have until it's gone. It hit me that, here's another witness is gone, another survivor. What a loss to the world. And so I got involved with the museum, and at some point we kind of decided that at some point we're not going to have any more survivors to tell their stories, and it's going to be up to the 2nd generation and the 3rd generation to continue to educate and to help with their testimonies and share and educate so that something like this could never happen again.
Did your parents ever make the trip back to Europe? Have you gone and retraced their footsteps at all?
My father never set foot in Europe again. My mom went back to Hungary a few times only because she had an aunt and a cousin who survived and she wanted to see them. I went with her one time when she was, my father had already passed. My father made me promise him that I would never go to Hungary. He said, they don't deserve a dime of your money. You should not go there. And, but when my mom wanted to go for the last time, she was 80 years old already. And I didn't feel like she should go alone. So my daughter and I, 3 generations, we went back. But we only spent maybe 5 days there, just enough time for her to see her cousin, visit him. But I never went to their hometowns or never traced it.
What was that trip like, though, for you and for your mother, too?
For my mother, she was mostly, concentrating on her family and cousin. For me, it was very difficult because, sorry about my dog, because every older person that I saw, I just looked at them and in my head, I was asking, what did you do? How many Jews did you turn in? I mean, it was very difficult for me to get beyond that. Later on, I made a trip to Poland, to Warsaw also, and I had the same situation. It was just very difficult to see older people, and in my head, I was questioning who they were and what they did, and I knew in my heart that they're still anti-Semitic. And they still would probably have rather my parents did not come back.
How did your parents' experience impact your childhood? Or did it?
It did. I grew up in Israel, in the northern part of Israel, on a moshav, which is an agricultural community. And everybody in that community was a survivor. All the adults were survivors, all the kids were children of survivors, and we didn't know any better. My parents didn't talk about it. They tried to, rebuild their lives, to build a new country, to make their children's lives, not be affected. It wasn't until we moved to the US that I saw a difference in them, in that they became very, very protective. They didn't allow me to have non-Jewish friends, especially do not date non-Jewish men. And so they were very, very protective. And I think some of that has rubbed off on me. I'm very protective of my kids. And I always teach them. I taught them from a very young age to always be aware, always know that, they have one country in the world that they can go to where Jews are welcome. And so I think that's partially from their upbringing and their influence.
What brought your family to the US and what was the experience like coming here?
My parents came to the US because my older brother was becoming of military age. In Israel, everybody has to serve in the military, men and women. And so he was finishing up high school. And my father said, I spent so much of my life in war. First during the war, and then came to Israel. He served in a war there, and he always had, living up on the border of Syria in Israel, he always had to carry a machine gun with him. And he said, I don't want that for my son. So we came to the US. He wanted my brother to get educated and have the opportunities that he didn't have. So we came to the US. for me, it was difficult because when you're 12 years old and you leave everything you know, it was very difficult. I didn't speak a word of English. I was put into public school day one and had to fend for myself. And it was tough. It was tough.
I think I have one more question. I know you kind of touched on this with what your father's message was, but do you have anything else that you kind of hope people take away from hearing your family's story?
I would like people to pay attention. Today, unfortunately, the United States is probably more anti-Semitic than it has been in many, many years. And it's very troubling. And you know, kids nowadays in the universities, Jewish kids don't feel safe. Even people walking on the street in Brooklyn, New York, are being attacked only because they look Jewish. So Jews can't even wear their necklaces that might show their religion. And I would love to tell people, please pay attention. You know, you don't hear it often in the media that what's happening, all the attacks on Jews that happens almost daily. Please pay attention and do something, educate people. I think we have a long way to go to educate. I wish the churches and the mosques and even the synagogues would talk about it and try to educate what could happen with hate.
A powerful message to end on. That is all the questions we have. Thank you so much again.
Sure, thanks for having me.